Hello, welcome everybody to That Reminds Me Of. You're here with Baron and the Doc, and this week we're talking about the film His House by Remi Weekes.
That's right, and this is the show where we talk about films and the films we're reminded of while watching those films, and just a heads up to everybody, it is spoiler heavy at times. So if that bothers you, you might want to see the film first, otherwise continue listening.
I'm going to jump straight into saying what it's about, and we're not going to go on and on with our long synopses today. We'll just give a sense of it and let's start talking about it.
Those days are behind us. This is a short synopsis day. I can't wait. Let's hear it, Doc.
Well, to me, this film was the story of a couple from South Sudan who have fled South Sudan as refugees, arrived in England to build a new life. They've arrived with their daughter. No, they haven't. they fled South Sudan with their daughter, but she was killed on the journey. Like, she died in an accident with their treacherous boat journey to England, and that they arrive in England. They get given a house to stay in. It's quite a big house. It's a crappy.
Sorry, I'm still laughing about them when they arrive with their daughter, because what I can't get out of my head is that if they had arrived with her, we wouldn't even have a story. The film
wouldn't have a film.
Anyway,
what an awful attempt at describing the film.
Here we are.
Where did I get to?
Let's make it super short, and now we've just sort of gone on
completely stuffed it.
Okay,
but it's comedic. So
Keep going.
They're given as refugees somewhere to live, and it's a big house. They're sort of half lucky to have such a big house, but it's also dilapidated and it's really crappy and it's barely a livable situation. And they move in and they're haunted by their past throughout this, and they've got ghosts coming through the walls, and it's just an awful haunted house situation. But as you go on, you realise that there's perhaps a mixture of haunting versus their past, actually coming back in some kind of post-traumatic stress way. That's a setup rather than a synopsis, but I think maybe we can start there and continue to talk.
That's a good setup, Doc. And I think Jessie the cat's trying to get into, which reminds me of the film. This is a film that blends haunted house horror with a refugee story and talks about a lot of social issues while kind of trying to make you jump out of your skin.
That's interesting, because that's exactly what it is. And I'm going to just come straight out and say I think a refugee story may not have, got me in its own right. Yet another haunted house story may not have got me in its own right, but the combo of the two really got me, and I loved it.
Yeah.
I don't know, what were your first impressions?
I think that's the way horror's going these days too. No, absolutely. I thought exactly the same thing. And I think the reason that I thought that was that as a horror film, to me, it didn't quite stand up on its own two legs just as a horror film. If it didn't have that refugee situation, and also just two really great actors who are playing parts with quite a strong African accent, which in itself is, something kind of quite new and refreshing in the horror genre. If you didn't have some of these other elements going on, I think the jump scares and the ghosts and all of those elements just wouldn't have really held up. I think I personally found myself getting a little bored with them about midway through the film and wondering, if there was going to be more. And thankfully there was more, which was great.
It's funny you said about it standing up. I had written here, my first question to you was going to be verbatim, as a horror movie, did this stand up?
There you go.
And it's not that it didn't stand up. Like, I think they did the horror some justice. Like, some of the sort of creepy looks and timings and everything were pretty good.
Yeah.
But just not superb. No, it wasn't that they weren't superb or well done. It's just that the film didn't hinge on it or rely on it, I thought.
Exactly. Some of it worked really well. Other parts didn't. I think that's the issue, right? It was a little bit hit and miss, and there was a little too much of it. Like, so if you're gonna show ghosts, a house full of ghosts, and you're just gonna outright show them pretty early on in the film, then it has to build to something more devastating or more scary, more dramatic, or something that has more of a physical threat to it. But it almost seemed like from the very beginning, they were showing us a lot, and they just kept showing us a lot. It does get quite physical towards the end, but I don't know if I felt like that element on its own really kind of had quite the right arc to it. And if it weren't for the fact that it then takes this kind of magical realism turn and ends up sort of with them walking into their own past and reliving it, and therefore allowing the audience to kind of like relive or to live through their past, like that's sort of what elevates the whole thing.
Completely. It's like it had horror elements but no horror arc.
Right. I think that's right.
So, yeah, but that doesn't mean it didn't have an arc, because it well and truly did, on a character level and on the emotional and the psychological and the relationship and all these levels there. There was plenty of action to keep the story moving.
Absolutely. And so for me, a big part of it was I was intrigued by the sort of journey they were going to take as refugees, and who the characters they were going to come across, and like how that was working. That wasn't a completely fulfilling story, but I think if you combine the horror and the sort of the realism of that element of it, like the refugee story, with the actors and the performances they were pulling off, that's when it starts to just like the whole thing is quite clever. Like it gels really well on that level.
Yeah, I think I'd speak more highly of the refugee experience portion of it. Like I just thought it was how real or not it is. I don't know, but I thought it was tried to be fairly truthful and morally complex. And so all of the characters, if we take the British characters for starters, so they're in the detention center, and the British characters are kind of boring, sort of just annoying, but not awful people. Just, there's a bit of both. There's some prejudice, but also some kindness.
Yeah.
And for the most part, they're wankers, but not always. And that just played fairly real to me, even whether or not it's true to life. It was a complex, cool expression of it.
Yeah, I think you're right. How did you take the story? Really, you've got two kind of storylines going here. There's the sort of them having arrived in England and the being given a house to live in that at first, to our eyes, looks really terrible, but to them seems like a mansion in scale. And then watching that dream kind of slowly get eroded and torn down as their past haunts them and all these things happen, versus the story of like them starting off in South Sudan and making their sort of journey to England in the first place. Like, how did you find the way those two stories unraveled? Did you like the way that was pieced together?
Yes, I did. I very much did. There was the main story is them arriving in England, and the escape from South Sudan is obviously all in flashback, and the England story was just cool. That was a more standard refugee. There's the tension between the two characters of one trying to acclimatise and wearing the polo shirt and the chinos and going to the pub and and eating with cutlery and really trying to be a pom.
Yeah.
And his wife clearly wanting to retain parts of her identity. So I really liked how that played out, and I think that would be very truthful to what the experience would be, and the two parts of yourself. But then it's the other, those flashbacks, like they had just such a narrative purpose in the end that by going back to South Sudan. And is this the time to talk about the, I think, critical moment in the film?
Yeah, I think we have to. Let's just say, big spoiler alert here, because this next section that I think we're about to get into is a major turning point. It comes towards the end of the second act. It's so revelatory and makes everything that comes before it make sense.
I'm going to backtrack one little bit on that storyline, because I guess the film starts on that storyline as well, doesn't it? It starts in the ocean setup, which I thought was a beautiful beginning of the film. It looked really not so real. It wasn't real. It wasn't realism, but it felt close and intimate. You really felt like you were in that ocean and experiencing the loss of the daughter.
Yeah, you really do, don't you? Yeah.
And that is the absolute underpinning of the whole film. Like they're not just escaping from South Sudan. They've gone through this tragedy of losing their daughter. And then as in flashback, you go back to that, escape journey, you ultimately discover that it's not their bloody daughter after all, that they've stolen someone else's daughter in order to con the bus driver to let them on the bus.
And what we've been hearing the whole way through in this ghost story is a ghost, an angry spirit of some sort, demanding the sacrifice of the husband in this couple for what he's done, basically. And you don't really understand it until you get to this point right towards the end of the second act, where suddenly you realize the thing he's done, his sin, and the reason why they're being haunted at all is because there was a random girl just sitting there on the side of the road while they're all queuing up to get on a bus, just as men with guns are driving up to gun everyone down, and he pretends it's his daughter to get himself and his wife on the bus. And that's the sin. And then, of course, the greater sin is that he sort of promises her that he'll keep her alive and save her, and ends up leaving her to drown when their boat capsizes.
What did you think of that twist?
I thought it was beautiful. It made the whole film for me. I think I was enjoying the film and I was going for the ride up until, but sort of not entirely sold and not, sure how I was going to think about this film at the end, until it got to that point where we had the big flashback sequence that was almost, like I was saying, it's like almost a magical realism thing where the characters walk into their past. And there's this great moment where Bol and Rial are the two characters, if I'm getting it right. It's where the wife walks back into that group of women and they're all sitting around having a discussion and a laugh, and then she ends up hiding in a piece of furniture, and when she comes out, all of the women are dead and they've been gunned down. And then from there on you get the sequence of them sort of hiding out and going on the run. And I think that whole sequence leading up to the moment where the husband just grabs a random girl and pretends that she's his daughter, like that was just gut-wrenching.
I don't think I've seen a better twist in a film, because you can think of tricksy twists where you think, oh, how clever. Yeah, that's really turned it on its head. That's what a great reveal. But this is just a twist that completely changes your perspective of the characters. Like, you are absolutely with the what's his name, Bol.
Yeah.
You're with him every step of the way, and just thinking, the poor man, he's trying to get on with his life while knowing that there's all this baggage.
Yeah.
And now, and you can't. You're still with him. You sort of, at least I just then thought, he's done this horrible thing, almost the worst thing you can imagine, and I'm feeling it for him because I like him so much by now.
Yeah, and also I can understand what he's done. I can understand it at the same time. Like, I could see myself 100% doing something similar. You know what I mean? In that situation, you know. It's just nobody wants to imagine it. Nobody can imagine what it would be like to be there, really. And so when you see them, when you see the characters sort of built up so carefully to lead to this moment, so that when it happens, you don't hate them for it, is clever storytelling.
I'd like to know what your wife thought of it. Edith being African herself.
Yeah, I actually,
you being half African.
That's right. We didn't talk about it a lot, honestly, afterwards. So I need to ask her myself. One thing we did talk about is that we both love Wunmi Mosaku. She is just incredible, and she's been in some other things that are. She's just always great. She just shines through. She's got a really memorable face. She's an incredible talent, and she's great in this as well.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. She's just got one of those really intoxicating, fun to watch faces.
Yeah,
and she's I think she's Nigerian heritage, but she's British, which surprised me, given that we've seen her in Lovecraft Country.
Yeah,
and she's an American there.
But
the other bloke, Sope Dirisu.
Yeah.
He was great too.
He was great too. You know what? You mentioned Lovecraft Country. I was reminded a lot of Lovecraft Country, which will be, as a heads up, that's one of my references here. But that combo of Wunmi and Sope really reminded me of her and Jonathan Majors, because
is Jonathan Majors the main guy?
Yeah, he's the main guy in Lovecraft Country, and he's got a similar sort of set of features and a way of expressing himself to this guy. So it was interesting to see the two together after just watching Lovecraft Country not that long ago. And there's also, I mean, getting into the references a little early, but there's also a bunch of similar ideas of sort of old magic. There's the whole completely black cast that you have in Lovecraft Country almost, and dealing with cultural and social issues alongside paranormal, horror. And it works. Both this film and that show just show how well that works.
That's a great reference. I'd been thinking Lovecraft Country as well, but I thought it was only because of Wunmi, and because, like you, Sope reminded me just physically of strangely, and I'm trying to figure out what it was, but their presence and literally their faces looked a bit the same.
There are moments when Sope looks sort of like he's near the edge of cracking, that he looks, when he makes certain expressions, certain faces, you see Jonathan Majors doing almost the same thing. Yeah.
Hasn't Jonathan Majors got one of the most amazing faces on television?
Incredible. Yeah. What a talent. And when you saw The Five Bloods, did you think to yourself, this guy's going to be huge? Because I remember saying I liked him in it, but I didn't see that he was going to do what he's done, You're just blowing my mind. I'm sorry. Yeah.
We're catching on camera you blowing my mind, because I didn't put it together that he was that guy.
Yeah. Yeah, isn't that crazy? That shows you the depth and breadth and the versatility. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, he was good in that. He was good in that too, from memory.
He was. I liked him, but I didn't think he was over, the way actors become really famous, and then you go back and you realize 10 years before they were in a film and you just didn't even recognize them. They're almost unrecognizable. Well, it's a little bit of that. Like, he's good, but you wouldn't say, wow, he's going to be something huge.
Yeah. No, he's got a presence. But this bloke was pretty much just as good and probably more polished, I would say. Probably a better actor, I would say.
Yeah.
I don't want to be
don't want to be hard on Jonathan.
Don't want to be hard. But to your point of the comparisons, I think an interesting difference between Lovecraft and this was the portrayal of the whiteys in it. Because in Lovecraft, it's, for the most part, they may as well, the white population may as well be White Walkers, or
that's true,
or something.
That's true, Doc. They're basically stand up, cut out cardboard characters, aren't they?
Yeah. But in this one, it was just so, they were just so obviously just some British bureaucrats.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was a nice.
That's the Brits for you, hey? Because they would never do that, the Lovecraft country thing. Like,
it's true.
All of the characters need to feel real in some way, real and like people you've met on the streets before.
And I think I on balance preferred that. I preferred the complexity of it.
I totally agree. Even though I think there were a bunch of wankers in this, but then again, that's sort of, you know, look at from the outside what this story would look like. You know, the house is getting destroyed with hammers and it seems crazy. So maybe it's just reasonable that they seem like wankers. You know.
Well, I think that's just truthful that they're, for the most part, they were acting like wankers. But what's his name, Doctor Who?
Yeah.
He was just sort of tired of the whole situation, and he was willing to give him a go, but then, you know, if they stuff up, he thinks, oh no, I'm going to have to report you.
That's
I don't
true.
really want to.
That felt real. And you know what is nice too is that you hear about people from, like, refugees from South Sudan, particularly in Australia. It's like, stories are in the news all the time, and we've got politicians here that say awful things about African gangs and so on. So to actually have a story that is about some people from South Sudan that has a little bit of nuance to it, and is still commercial, that people can kind of absorb through Netflix without feeling like they're watching a bit of a statement film, you know, is good. I think that's really great. We need more of those.
Well, I think that's the turn our society has taken, and not enough and not fast enough.
Yeah. But
I just really got such a kick out of watching this story about, you know, African refugees coming to England and being enthralled by their story rather than the statement of their story. And this is a horror story. Like, everyone can get into it.
Yeah.
And the more of that there is, that's gonna be what, you know, fixes all our, you know, racism problems and everything. It's just being able to relate to each other's stories.
Absolutely. How good is Netflix for that alone? Just the fact that we're now seeing films with people with different accents. Americans are watching films and reading subtitles. Like, who would have thought that would ever happen? But they are. It's happening. People are reading subtitles again because there's some great German thing that's popped up on Netflix that everyone says you need to watch, right? Or whatever it is. It's great.
Yeah, we can talk about this in the next film that we're going to do in our next episode, actually. But something that I really love is when, and this it's crazy that this even has to be said, but in films where you've got different ethnicities playing different characters, not for, you know, he's not playing the Indian guy, he's just playing a role, and he just happens to be that ethnicity.
Yes.
I think of the Beatles movie that what was it, Yesterday?
Oh, Yesterday, that was great. Yes.
Just the fact that the main guy was, I think he was Indian.
Yeah, I think so too.
Subcontinental. And nothing to do with it. Like, and why should we even notice that, other than the fact that it's never really been a thing before?
Other than that it's unusual, just in itself, and it shouldn't be, but it is. Yeah, and yet, and also, what's better than doing what Lovecraft Country did, where every character is black, or what Crazy Rich Asians did, where it's an entirely Asian cast? That's great, but to have films that actually just cast people based on talent, and there's no, you know, real swaying one way or the other. And Yesterday's a perfect example of that. You know, there's a Indian English dude who's going to be the main character, and it's never really even discussed. It's fine. And of course it is. And he's awesome.
So what did this film remind you of, Baron? Anything other than Lovecraft?
First of all, I'll say I did a little looking around, and Remi, the director, Remi Weekes, he said he was inspired by The Innocents, The Others, and The Shining. And I think those are all just inspirations because they're really good ghost films. I don't really see any of those in this, so I would not in a big way anyway.
One of those that you mentioned, The Shining.
Yeah,
That was one of mine. Like, not in any amazing, amazing way, but just the fact of going crazy inside a house, so that the house is turning on you, and you're not sure if that is a haunting or if it's just in your head. So that's a pretty clear reference for the Shining to me.
Absolutely. And just the fact that we've got a man kind of losing it and turning towards almost like domestic violence and tearing the house apart. Which is even more so in the Stephen King version. That's a really part of the story.
Well, in both they're taking tools and breaking down walls and doors.
Absolutely, that too. Yeah.
Another thing I really liked, you mentioned the African accents. And it's true that you don't often get African accents in commercial films, but it's happening gradually more and more, and it's almost an anti-reference. But one of the more recent ones is Black Panther.
Good point. Yes,
which I really didn't like that movie much at all, but I did like the fact that they used the African accents. I think they could have done so much better. It seems so lollipop to me, and to get all authentic in the accents to that detail, and then just have it become a pretty over-the-top Marvel thing was a bit disappointing. But in this one, they're real accents, yes, but it's real stories, and they were true to the accents. And even beyond the accents, just little subtleties like, I don't know much of the history or the cultural significance, but the way the little the burn tattoos.
Mm-hmm. All that sort of tribal scarring.
Yeah. And I thought they were done in a really clever, subtle enough way for, us Anglo audience to get it, not be intimidated by it, but just start to understand it and think, okay, well, that's just a little bit like the spot on the forehead or our own tattoos, or
there was a clue there for all of us in those tribal scarrings that they had that I didn't realize, I didn't even think about until the reveal. But the little girl has just like intense scarring. She all across her forehead, on her cheeks. I think she had a lot of scars, and the scars that she had were clearly from a different tribe to the two that we were looking at. And there was just this one bit where the wife says, I've got both. But you can tell what she's saying is that her ones that are from her tribe are the little ones next to her eyes on her temples. And then she'd added the other scars, which sort of made you realize that the girl, you should have, if you were putting it all together, the girl was from a different tribe to them. That was interesting.
I didn't pick up on that, but that's a great point. That adds a lot of extra data to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's cool to have characters that have those sorts of cultural things going on that you're not used to seeing in a film is great. Look, I don't have much else to add. There's things that have popped into my head as we've been talking that are now completely gone, but I don't have any other references. But were there any others on your list, Doc?
I'm almost embarrassed to say it. This is a ridiculous one, but it just popped into my head. The old 70s sitcom, I think it's 70s, Love Thy Neighbour.
You have to explain this one. I'm really curious.
Now, it's probably considered, it would have to be considered these days sort of borderline, unacceptable, I think. But the premise is a white working class socialist has his world turned upside down when an educated black man moves in next door. And I remember watching it as a kid, and you've got this bogan white dude and this really cool cultured black guy, and it just made me think of it when Bowl entered the British pub and was all of a sudden confronted with this yobbo British tradition of all the blokes there together, and feeling a bit disengaged from it. And it's sometimes that was what was explored in Love Thy Neighbour for completely inappropriate comic value, but I think it showed me how far perhaps the conversations come, and how mature we've got. Well,
that's good.
I'm not sure that we have yet. But,
I don't know. Well, we're definitely working on it. It's a good sign. Well, any last thoughts on the film, Doc? Any closing remarks?
No, I loved it. I loved the whole thing.
I will also say that critics and audiences alike are pretty into this as well. Rotten Tomatoes, this is still sitting at 100% for the critics, the score, which is a crazy score. Like, I don't know what that actually means. But audiences have also placed it around 74%. So it's being enjoyed by regular people and critics at the same time, which is always a good sign.
I've got one criticism. When he went in and bought the polo and the chinos, because he was on the drive to assimilate at that point.
Yes.
He doesn't have much money. He went and bought them, comes home, and immediately, in the privacy of his own home, starts doing all this heavy-duty work, getting them all filthy and bloodstained.
I agree. That would never happen. Never.
Why on earth... he's got a good body. Take your top off and just do it with no top on.
I know. It's like going out and getting your Sunday best and then doing handyman work in it. It didn't make any sense. I agree. I felt the same way. When I saw the blood splattered all over it.
Made me uncomfortable.
Yeah. Same. Okay, that's a good one.
I think we're done though, yeah?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is one to recommend for people to check out for lots of reasons. This is the sort of stuff that comes out on Netflix that excites me about what that platform can do.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
See you next time.
See you next time, Doc.